Ooh. We're good?
Yep.
Good morning, Farech and Chanukah. We begin today's daf Mem Beis Maseches Bava Kama. We begin by thanking our sponsors. We thank Summer Wolf for sponsoring all the shurim for the month of Teves with immense gratitude for the refuahs from Hashem and the merit of a refuah shlema for all those in need and the zchus of our brave Israeli soldiers and hostages. Kadosh Baruch Hu should be Kabbalah, our tefillas, and the zchus of our limud Torah should be Yeshua for all Klal Yisrael. We also dedicate all the shurim of Maseches Bava Kama to Master Sergeant Yomi Harush Hashem Yinka Damai, who was Meiser Nefesh to save so many people during the horrific terror attack on October 7th. Today's Amud is Daf Mem Beis Maseches Bava Kama. We are going to begin on Mem Aleph Amud Beis at the two dots. It's about 10 to 15 lines up from the bottom. So if you remember from yesterday, we are in the middle of darshaning the pasuk of Ubal Hashar Naki. Pasuk tells us that when an animal which is a tam, not a sharmud, an animal which is a tam, that has not yet built up a pattern of causing damage, kills somebody, halacha is the animal is going to be killed. The Ubal Hashar Naki, there isn't going to be any payments. And Ubal Hashar Naki is something which has been darshan in many different ways. Yesterday, Ubal Hashar Naki taught us that he is wiped out clean, literally. Like you say, someone's cleaned out, Ubal Hashar Naki. Ubal Hashar Naki meant that the animals, the hides that were left over, asur bahana, and anything left over from the animal is asur bahana. Now the Gemara is going to present in today's Amud a number of different alternative understandings of what Ubal Hashar Naki is teaching us in that pasuk. Tana Rabbanan, Ubal Hashar Naki, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Naki michatzi kofer. What does that mean? That means that if a shar kills a person, the halacha is it has to pay kofer. There's a monetary payment that must be paid when a person is killed. You might think that a shar tam, a shar that has not yet built up a pattern of causing damage, would have to pay chatzi kofer, half of that value. Ubal Hashar Naki says no, he does not have to pay half that value. In other words, half payment, chatzi nezek, that a shar tam pays is relevant by damages, but not when it comes to killing somebody, because when it comes to kill somebody, the animal is put to death and no financial payments are made, not half the value and not the full value. Amar lo Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says, hold on a second. Rabbi Eliezer, how could it be that the pasuk of Ubal Hashar Naki was written specifically to exempt the owner from paying half the value of the person who was killed? That doesn't make sense. We mentioned this so many times throughout the Masechta that not only does a shar tam not pay the full damage, only pays half the damage, but also a shar tam only ever pays from its value. It never will pay anything that exceeds the value of the actual animal. So if that's the case, as Rabbi Akiva, you just put the animal to death. So haviu lifnei bezdin yishalem lach. The guy, the owner of the animal, will say, you know what? You're right. You think I have to pay half the value of the person who was killed? I have to pay chatzi kofer? No problem. I'll be right here with my animal and take the value of the person from the animal. How much will that be? Zero. It will be zero because the animal's dead. An animal that's dead doesn't have any value. The animal is put to death. The animal's dead. It can't be used for anything. So therefore, its value is zero. Now you're telling me you would have thought I would have to pay half the value of the person who was killed. Maybe that would be the case. But where do I pay it from? I pay it from the assets of the animal. The assets of the animal are zero because it was put to death. So it can't be the pasuk is telling me that the owner of a shar tam would only pay half of. I would have thought you pay half of the value of the person who was killed. Comes along the pasuk and says you pay zero. Just logically you would pay zero anyway because the animal is not worth anything. So that's Rabbi Kiva's question. Rabbi Eliezer responds to him and says, Kachani beinecha? Are you kidding me? That's how you view me? You looked at my answer and you viewed me as explaining to you something so simple. In other words, you think shedini bozeh shechayav misa? You thought I was telling you the animal is chayav misa, that still in such a case it won't pay half the value of the person who was killed? Of course, I understand that. I understand if the animal's dead, there's no value to collect from. You see, like there was such a response over here of, that's how you see me? And he took it a little bit personally. And he responded, Ein dini ela kshehemis ha'adam al pi eid echad o al pi bailim. He says, when I told you my din, that the pasuk is telling you that you won't pay for any damages to the person or any financial fees to the person, I was talking about a case where the animal killed somebody but managed to escape death. How did it escape death? Well, there weren't two witnesses that saw that the animal killed the person. Maybe there was one witness. You can't kill an animal with one witness. Or I was talking about a case where there were no witnesses. But you know what? The owner of the shar actually confessed that his animal got out of control and killed the animal. In such a case, the animal won't be put to death. In that case, says Rabbi Eliezer, that's what I'm telling you. You would have thought there would be a tam payment of half the value of the hofer, half the value of the person that was killed. Comes along Baal Sharnaki to say, even though the animal's not going to be put to death, and the animal still maintains its full value, nevertheless, a shartam does not pay anything, not even half the value of the person. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. How could that be? How could you think that if the animal was not convicted of killing the person, either because there weren't two witnesses, or because there was only the owner who came to confess, Al pi bailim, moda b'knasu. If the only way that we know that this animal killed a person is because the owner came to confess, that means the owner actually was owning up to it. And guess what? The halacha is, anytime there's a knas, a financial penalty, not a financial value, but a financial penalty, which is what the kofar payment is. It's a penalty. It's not that you're actually paying the value of a person. There's no such thing as a value of a person. The value of a person exceeds any amount of money. So the payment of kofar is always going to be a payment which is going to be a knas, moed b'knas pater. If the owner confesses, the halacha is, anytime a person confesses before being convicted that they owe a financial penalty, they get out of it. So therefore, there would be no havamina. It would be impossible to think or even to entertain the thought that if there weren't two edim, and the only way we know that this animal came by and killed this other person is because the owner confessed to it, of course there'll be no financial payment over there. It's no different than any other financial penalty, where if you're going to admit that you owe it, that you don't have to pay it. Now it happens to be, Tosfos points out, we could have asked a similar question. Rashi writes this also. Rashi and Tosfos write this. Now you could have asked a similar question when it comes to Eid Echad also. What's the havamina that would have to pay the financial payment when there's an Eid Echad? An Eid Echad does not have the ability to be able to extract money from somebody. An Eid Echad, the only thing an Eid Echad could do is to create enough doubt that Beis Din would impose, or that not Beis Din, but that the Torah would impose a shavua, that the person would have to take an oath that they're not obligated. But again, in this case, you follow it through all the way. If one aid comes and says, I watched that animal kill a person, then we go to the owner and say, now you have to take a shavua. You have to go to Beis Din and take an oath that your animal didn't kill the person. Now again, if the owner refuses to take that oath, essentially the chiyuv is coming through that person. So again, in either one of these cases, we were going to have this question that it can't be that there'll be a financial payment coming about by way of either through an Eid Echad, one witness, or through the owner himself confessing. The Gemara says, well, you know what? That's because all this is going to only make sense. In other words, your question only makes sense if you understand that kofar, this financial payment over here, is a penalty. However, hu kasavar, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that kofar kapara. Kofar is actually instituted, as the word sounds, as a kapara. Bottom line is, your animal went out and killed somebody. And there, even though it wasn't you, maybe it wasn't a real negligence on your part because your animal was a tam, but still, somebody died because of you. So the kofar payment, the financial payment, is there to bring about an atonement to the owner. In such a case, you would actually think maybe the guy wants to make the payment. He wants to have a kapara. He wants to be atoned for someone being killed through his property. So that's why he thinks there would have been a havamina. There would have been a thought to say that when he owns up to the mistake that his animal killed somebody, that even though his animal is not going to be put to death, he would still make a financial payment. And how much of a payment? Chatzi kofar, because it's a tam. Kamash blon, the pasuk tells us, ubala sharnaki, that no, he does not pay anything. Tani idach, we have another brisa where a different answer was given. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Akiva, in other words, we have a conversation where Rabbi Eliezer responded to Rabbi Akiva and said, Kach ani beinecha, that's how you see me. In other words, you understand shadini b'zeh shechayev misa, that my opinion that the pasuk was telling us that there's no financial payment is when the animal is actually put to death. No. Ein dini ela b'miskavan la'aragas behema v'haragas adam. I was talking about a different case, where my animal actually intended to kill another animal, but by mistake, it found itself goring a person, in such a case, it won't be put to death. Or similarly, Lemitzri wanted to kill a Mitzri, Harag Yisrael, and killed a Jew instead. L'Nephalim wanted to kill a child, which is a nefel, in other words, a miscarried child or stillborn, V'harag ben Kayama, and killed a child that was alive. In such a case, all those cases are cases where the animal had intention to kill. There were Eidim that watched to kill. However, there was a problem. The animal killed the wrong person. Tried to kill something else, another animal, or didn't have a mind to kill a Jew, didn't have a mind to kill a ben kayam, a child that can survive. In those cases, the animal will not be put to death. In such a case, says Rabbi Eliezer, you would think there would be a financial payment of chatzi kofar when the animal is a tam. The pasuk tells us about sharnaki, there is no financial payment at all. Now the Gemara says, Hai Amar Le Bereisha. There's two answers that were given here. Which one was said first? If Kahana Mishmei de Rav Amar, if Kahana the name of Rav said, Miskaven Amar Le Bereisha, in other words, the second teretz that our Gemara gave was really said first. Rav Tavyumi Mishmei de Rava, Rav Tavyumi says the name of Rava, Hamis Amar Le Bereisha. That it killed the person, but there weren't enough Eidim, or there were no Eidim at all. That was the answer that was given first. The Gemara explains why each one had their opinion about which one was said first. Rav Kahana says the name of Rav that Miskavan Liberation, the second teretz was said first. Mashal. The Gemara gives a mashal. Let's say it to a fisherman. Shesholo dagim in a yam. He's fishing fish out of the sea. The top of Membez of Aleph, Mishkach Rav Ravi, if the fisherman finds large fish, then Shakil, he'll take it, because that's what he's there for. He wants big, large fish. But he doesn't stop right there. He's still Zutri Shakale. He'll still catch smaller fish afterwards. He'll still take them home. In other words, sometimes a person, even though they caught a big fish, they're still willing to catch smaller fish afterwards. In other words, the second teretz is much better. There's no question to be had on it. It makes perfect sense. The animal is not being put to death. You might think that this is financial payment. So it comes along the pasuk and says, no financial payment. The other teretz, the previous one that our Gemara mentioned, had a big problem. Because we said, Modeh b'kanas pater, so therefore everybody should admit that there's no financial payment. Nevertheless, he found some small fish, he picked it up anyway. Rav Tavyumi made the Rav Amar. Rav Tavyumi, the name of Rav, said, no, Hamis Amar Le Bereisha, the second teretz. Sorry, the conversation took place exactly as our Gemara records it. They killed, but there were no Eidim, or there's only one Eid. In that case, that was said first, and then Mashal Litzayit Sheshol Dagam and Ayam. It's similar to a case of a fisherman he's fishing fish out of the water, and Mishkach Zutri Shakel. He's fishing, all he catches is these small little fish. He says, you know what? Maybe I won't catch any big fish today. So therefore, he picks them up, he puts them into his ice chest, and he brings it back home. Then, afterwards, Rav, when he catches big fish, then he says, Shadi Zutri Vishakel. He takes the small fish, throws them back into the sea, and says, I don't need these tiny little sardines. I'll have a massive, large fish. I'll take that one home. So he says, Shadi Zutri, he throws the small ones back, V'shak Ravarvi, and he takes the big one. So when I learned this Gemara, I actually learned this Gemara last night, and I was thinking, what's the mashal for? Usually you have a mashal. The concept of a mashal is, you have a very deep, complex concept. It's very difficult to explain it with all its details, so what you do is, you kind of simplify it through a mashal. Why is this so complicated? Why can't the Gemara just say, simply, either he had a good teretz initially, so he said the good teretz, and you know what? He heard a teretz which is afterwards, wasn't so good, he figured he'll hear it. In other words, what's the Gemara explaining that's so difficult that you need a mashal to be able to explain it? I don't know if this is the correct pshat, but this is the idea that came to my mind. Take it or leave it. This Gemara, just to me, when I read it, it sounds very similar to a discussion that took place between Shammai and Hillel. We know that there's machlokes between Shammai and Hillel. What's the proper way to be mekayim the pasuk is Zachar Yom HaShabbos L'Kacho? It says a person should remember Shabbos. How do you remember Shabbos during the week? So Shammai, on Sunday, he would go to the supermarket. He'd see what kind of food was there. He'd find a nice piece of meat or a nice fish. He'd say, you know what? I need fish for Shabbos. He'd take it home. Even though it wasn't the best cut of meat, it wasn't the largest or the juiciest and most tasty fish in the market, he said, listen, we've got to have fish for Shabbos. He'd bring it home. On Monday, he'd go back and find a better piece. He'd buy it again, and then he'd take the first one and eat it for lunch on Monday. And then, on Tuesday, he'd find a better one. He'd eat Mondays for lunch on Tuesday. Finally, Erev Shabbos came. He found the best piece of meat or the best fish. And then he would have the best out of the whole week. Everything else that he bought, he would eat for lunch during the week. The Gemara says that's how Shammai would be Mekayim, Zachar Yom Shabbos every single day, that he was always shopping for Shabbos. And whenever he found better stuff, he reserved the better produce and the better food for Shabbos. It sounds pretty similar to this Gemara, that you go shopping, you pick up what you get, and whether it's the best or not, you take it, and when you find something better, you hold on to that one. And I think it could be what the Gemara is saying over here. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think that there's definitely a Musar Haskell to take from this anyway, which is sometimes when you're learning, you come up with a pshat in something, it's just not so good. But it answers the question. So people might think like, I'm not bothering with this. The Gemara says, no. Even if you feel like it's a zutri, it's a small one, take it. Hold on to it. It's worthwhile. What happens? You take another one which I have a question and I'm not so sure. Keep on going until finally Shakil Ravarvi, you find this great teretz. So what do you do then? And when you find the great teretz, you could say, you know what, my previous teretzim, maybe they weren't correct. Don't hold on to things that you're not sure if they're true. You get rid of them. The other way is also true. Sometimes people come up with a good teretz, came up with a good pshat. You know what? I'm done for the day. I'm out. I came up with a good tosfos. I learned it. I'm out. And Gemara says, no, that's not the appropriate way of learning. Sometimes you catch a big fish, you still go shopping afterwards for small fish. And I think that this is probably, hopefully, what the Gemara is telling us. And I think it really makes sense with the Gemara. They're arguing which one was said first, because either way, it gives you the approach of how a person has to learn Torah. A person has to be able to learn Torah every single day and say, I'm not done. I came up with a small little Torah. It makes sense. Things seem to fit well in the Gemara. Keep on going until you get this ravarvi, to this big, fat, juicy fish. Or the other way around, you come up with, sometimes this happens to people, and when you learn a bit measures with other people, sometimes people kvetch out a teretz. They come out with something which is not a great teretz, and the action zachan, you know what that means? They become so stubborn with their answer, they refuse to let go, despite the fact you have so many questions, so many weaknesses with it. They refuse to let go. The Gemara is saying, when you come up with a teretz, if it's not so good, okay, use it when you need it. It's called a doichak. You use it when you need it, but when you come up with a ravarvi, when you come up with the right pshat, at that point in time, you have to sometimes dismiss some of the things you learned beforehand, and then, ultimately, yes, you hold on to your ravarvi. That's what I think. That's why the mashal's here. Tanya idach. Now we have another approach to how to understand the pasuk of Bala Shar Naki. Bala Sharnaki, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer. So now, we had Rabbi Lezer this morning. Here comes Rabbi Yossi Aglili. He says, I'll tell you how to understand the pasuk of Baal Hashar Naki. What does that mean? Midmei Velados. So what's that talking about? The halacha is, if two people get into a fight, the pasuk says, Ki yinatzu anashim yachtav. Two people get into a fight, and while they're fighting, they get so out of control, by mistake, one of them strikes a pregnant woman, and unfortunately, as a result of that, she miscarries her child. Okay, so the halacha is, in such a case, the pasuk says, "V'chiyanatzu anashim yachtav." Two people are fighting. V'nagfu isha hara v'yatzu yiladea. By mistake, struck a pregnant woman, and the child came out. V'lo yia ason. She does not die, so she remains alive. The child comes out, the fetus comes out. Anosh ye anesh, they should be punished. Kasha yashas ala bala isha nothing beflilim. They have to pay for the miscarried child. Now, Rabbi Yossi Aglili is saying that's only true when anoshim, when people are fighting. What happens if an animal strikes a pregnant woman, and as a result of that, she miscarries a child? There's no financial payment. That's what Baal Sharnaki means. There's no financial payment for killing the Vlados, the fetus. Amal Rabbi Kiva, the same Rabbi Kiva from before. He shows up. He's like, Aryeh Omer ki anatzu anashim. The pasuk tells you, guess what? Ki anatzu anashim. When people are fighting, anashim v'lo shvarim. Why do you need a pasuk of a Baal Sharnaki to tell me that the owner of the animal is not going to have to pay for the fetus that was miscarried? I've got news for you, says Rabbi Kiva. The pasuk already told us this. This whole discussion is only relevant when anashim are fighting. V'lo shvarim, not when animals are fighting. So the Gemara says, Shaper ka'amar Rabbi Kiva. The Gemara says, it seems like a pretty good question Rabbi Kiva asked. Amar Rav Ula Breder of Idi, Rav Ula Breder of Idi is going to explain why, even though the pasuk already said ki yinatzu anashim, that if people are fighting, still we have to have the pasuk of Baal Sharnaki to tell me that there's not going to be a financial payment if an animal causes her to miscarry. And the Gemara is going to try a number of attempts with that. I would have thought anashim v'lo shvarim hadomin la'anashim. Maybe it's excluding shvarim, an animal, a bull or ox that is similar to a person. What type of ox is similar to a person? Ma'anashim mu'adim. Just like when it comes to people, we know the halacha that people don't ever get a category called tam. A person is always responsible for what they do. So ma'anashim mu'adim, ashvar mu'adim, just like when it comes to people. People are a mu'ad for damage. That means they always have to pay. The same thing is true, the pasuk is now saying. People, yes, but not shvarim who are mu'adim. Hatam mechayiv. But if the animal is a shartam, which has not yet established a pattern of damaging, then I would say maybe that the shartam would have to pay. The pasuk tells you, Baal Sharnaki, to tell you, even a shartam does not have to make any financial payments if it causes a woman to miscarry her child. Amar Rava. Rava says, hold on. Yatziva ba'ara v'giyora b'shmeshmaya. This is an expression. What this means is, Yatziva is the resident, the local resident, is sitting on the ground. The Giyora, a visitor to the town, ends up being elevated all the way to the Shmei Shmai. It's like sitting on a throne, which basically means this is backwards. Everything is flipped over. You have a resident of a town. The resident of the town has a house, has a place to stay, gets a place to settle. He's a local tax-paying citizen. He gets his rights to use the resources of the community. A visitor comes, he's got to wait in line, which basically means if you flip it around, you're giving the wrong person the precedence. You're giving a visitor the opportunity to enjoy all the amenities of the town, and a person who's a tax-paying citizen gets nothing. And that's what the Gemara means to say. It's an expression to say this is backwards. How could you have even a hava mina to tell me that if a muad who's already established a pattern of causing damage is going to be exempt because that's similar to a person, and then you say anashim v'lo shvarim, but a tam that has no pattern of causing damage, still that will have to pay? it's exactly the opposite. It doesn't make any sense. Elama Rava suggests another teretz as to why, even though the pasuk says ki yinatzu anashim, which would, by definition, necessarily exclude animals, still I need a pasuk to tell me that a shar tam is not going to pay for the damage. Because it goes as follows. I would think anashim v'lo shvar madom al anashim, the same idea. The pasuk says anashim and it excludes people that are similar to, so I should say the other way around. Shvarim that are similar to people, ma'anashim mu'adim, just like people who are a mu'ad, af shvarim mu'adim, v'kal v'chomer l'tamin. And I would say, of course, logic would dictate, as we just got finished saying, that if a mu'ad doesn't have to pay, and a tam doesn't have to pay. Dipatiri, Hadrakas Rachmana Balashar Naki. The pasuk then went and wrote Balashar Naki to tell me that a shar tam does not have to pay. Why is the pasuk right there? It's obvious. If a mu'ah doesn't have to pay, of course a tam doesn't have to pay. So the pasuk tells you Balashar Naki, tam pater. There's a special mention by a tam to say that a tam doesn't pay, umuad chayiv. In other words, the whole idea of Baal Ashar Naki was to tell you that only Baal Ashar Naki, when the pasuk said anashim v'lo shvarim, it meant to exclude a shar tam, but a shar muad indeed will pay. Tam pater umuad chayiv. That's the way Rava explains it, and therefore he could explain why the pasuk of Baal Ashar Naki tells you that a shar tam will not have to pay the value of the vladas. Amar Abaya, Elamiyata. If that's the case, Gabi Poshes Nami Nemahachi. Let's say the same thing with regard to payments for embarrassment, which was mentioned in the Mishnah before, that shvarim don't pay it. Say anashim v'lo shvarim adom al anashim. Say exactly as we just got finished saying. The pasuk says anashim. Then it excludes shvarim, animals that are similar to anashim, which means ma'anashim mu'adim shvar mu'adim. So at face value, it would start off by excluding animals that are mu'adim. V'kal v'chomer l'tamin. You make a kal v'chomer and say, if a shar mu'ad doesn't have to pay for embarrassment, certainly a shar tam doesn't have to pay for embarrassment. Dipatiri hadakas achman ba'al shar naki. The pasuk adds in ba'al shar naki to say that no, shar tam patru mu'ad chayiv. And therefore, we will be able to establish from this Gemara that if a shar mu'ad embarrasses a person, then the owner would have to pay for the damage. If you want to say yes, indeed, that is going to be the halacha, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Ihachi, Listni, Baal Ashar Naki, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Omer Patim Midvei Vladas, Umi Boshes. Why doesn't he write that? Amar Abaya tells us, Abaye v'Rava d'Amar Tavaya. Sorry, the Gemara says Abaye and Rava, both of them say anashim. When it comes to anashim, anashim. It can't be because ain't ason beish. Ain't ason. Ain't ason beisha. The pasuk tells me there's no tragedy. In other words, there's no death. Beisha ye anshu. The pasuk clearly, in other words, this pasuk is the source for kam le b'derabamine. This pasuk is where we learn. Only if ein ason beisha, there was no tragic death of the woman, in such a case there'll be a financial payment for the miscarried children. Ein ason beisha ye anshu. However, yesh ason beisha lo ye anshu. If there is a tragedy with the woman, in other words, the woman got struck and she dies in such a case, there is not going to be any financial payment because of kamle b'draba b'nei. But however, below shvarim, this is not true when animals are fighting. In other words, this concept of kamle b'draba b'nei is only relevant when it's anashim who are fighting. So the Gemara reads, anashim, if anashim are fighting, ein asom isha anshu, if the woman does not die, then there's going to be a financial payment. Yesh asom b'isha lo ye anshu. There is a tragedy and the woman dies, then lo ye anshu, they don't have a financial payment because they're put to death. V'lo shvarim, this is not true when it comes to animals that are fighting. Even though there's a tragic death, nevertheless, the owner is going to have to incur financial payment. And then Hadr Kasav Rachman Baal Ashar Naki, the pasuk then writes Baal Ashar Naki to Pater to tell you that indeed they're going to be patur and there will not be any financial payment. Maskiv later, Rabbi Bava asked the following question: Atu ba'asum talyu milsa? Does this actually depend on whether or not there's a tragic death over here? Bekavana talyu milsa. It depends on the intention of what happened over here. Elamar Rabbi Bava anashim. The pasuk is talking about anashim were fighting that it kinis gavnu zelazeh. If they had intention to hurt each other, even though there's a tragedy where the woman dies, they're going to be paid. They're going to have to pay because they didn't intend to hit her. But however, if a person has in mind to strike the woman, in such a case, lo anshu, there will not be any financial payment. Why? Because kamlei b'derabba minei, if there are two consecutive punishments that are relevant, one of them carries a death penalty, the other one carries a financial payment, there will not be any financial payment because they're put to death, because kamlei b'derabba minei. V'lo shvarim, this is not true when it comes to animals. Da'afilu niskavnu l'isha atzma, even if the animal had intention to kill the person, the woman, anshu, still there will be a financial payment. So kasav rachmana ba'al sharnaki. That's why the pasuk writes ba'al sharnaki. This is Rabbi Yosef Glili's halacha depatiri, that there's not going to be any financial payment. The Gemara says v'chein ki yasa Rav Chagi midaroma. Similarly, when Rav Chagi came from Daram, from the south of Eretz Yisrael. Also, ba'aisi masnisa b'yadi, he came from the yeshiva in the south of Eretz Yisrael, and he brought a Mishnah with him, Kavaseit Rav Ada bar Ahava, which was similar to Rav Ada bar Ahava said. And he explained it exactly as we just got finished saying it, with the concept of Kamlei b'derabba minei. So that finishes off Rabbi Yossi Glili. So now if you remember, the first drasha from Baal Sharnaki that we had today came from Rabbi Eliezer. Who's the one who had a problem with Rabbi Eliezer's drasha? Rabbi Akiva. Then we had Rabbi Yossi Glili. He came up with another drasha from Baal Sharnaki. So that's the second one. Who had a problem with him? Rabbi Akiva. Now comes along Tani Idach, Baal Sharnaki, Rabbi Akiva Omer. Here's Rabbi Akiva himself, his own drasha. It gives us a little bit of insight as to what was going on here, because he had his own drasha from Baal Sharnaki, which was maybe his motivation to ask all those questions. So he says, Naki midmei eved. The halacha is, if a person kills an eved, a servant, the halacha is, you have to pay shloshim shekel. There's a financial payment of 30 shekel. So now Rabbi Kiva says, Naki midmei eved. So if a shar tam goes ahead and kills an eved, no financial payment of 30 shekel for the Eved. Top of them Beis, Amud Beis. Gemara now says, hold on a second, Rabbi Akiva. The neighbor Rabbi Akiva l'nafshei, v'halu atzmo, eino mishalem, ela migufo. Haviu l'bestin v'yishalem l'cha. Do you remember your question, Rabbi Akiva, that you asked at the beginning of the share this morning? This morning, when Rabbi Eliezer told us his halacha, and his halacha was that shar tam kills a person, there's no financial payment, even half payment for the kofar payment that comes along with killing a person. What was your question, Rabbi Akiva? Your question is, hold on, of course there's no financial payment. The animal is put to death. Shar tam only ever pays from its value. The animal's dead, so of course there's no financial payment. The animal's worth nothing. So the Gemara said, Rabbi Akiva, what about your own question on yourself? Why is your drasha any better that you feel like you're exempt from your own question? Amar of Shmuel bar Yitzchak, kishekadam ba'elav v'shachtu. Oh, I got a teretz, says the Gemara. We have a teretz, which is, Rabbi Akiva is talking about a case where before Beis Din had a chance to actually issue the ruling, you know what happened? The guy quickly made a barbecue. He shechted his animal. So again, animal's kosher. He shechted it. He did malicha, everything that has to be done, and he went ahead and he made lunch. So I would have thought, lish talimine. Now before he makes his lunch, he has to now deliver all those rib steaks to the owner of the eved. Kamash malan Baal Sharnaki. Basar tells us that no, the animal's dead because he shechted al pi halacha, and the animal now has value. You still don't have to pay that shloshim shekel. And the explanation is, since the animal is technically bar ketela, deserves to be put to death, he doesn't have to pay. Gemara says, hold on a second. Inasmuch as that's a good teretz for you, Rabbi Akiva, ihachi l'Rabbi Eliezer nami kishekadam v'shachtu. Why can Rabbi Eliezer say the same thing? Animal killed a person, not an eved, killed a person before basing on the opportunity to give the death sentence to this animal. The guy went ahead and shechted it. Gemara says, hachanami, it's true. Rabbi Eliezer could have answered that question. However, v'savar dilma islay taima achrina the adif mehai v'neimalei. So here, I think this line is a very important line. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva asked the question, and he asked it knowing that this is a possible teretz, but he was thinking maybe Rabbi Eliezer has a much better teretz that he'll teach me, and I'll learn from him. So you see what's going on over here. Rabbi Akiva, when he was asking all these questions, he wasn't just being stubborn and asking questions because he wanted to stick up for his drasha. Rabbi Akiva wanted to learn. Rabbi Akiva knew his drasha. He knew Baal Ashar Naki. He knew he was excluding the payments of Shloshim Shekel for an Eved. He also knew that there was a potential answer, which was that he shechted the animal, he slaughtered the animal before Beis Din had a chance to actually give their psak din. But still, he asked the question to see, you know what? I may actually learn something from Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer will give me a better answer and I'll learn something new. So that's why he was asking all those questions, because he wanted to be able to pull the bigger chiddush out of Rabbi Eliezer, which would have been an opportunity for Rabbi Akiva to learn something. So the Gemara says, you know what? The truth is, why didn't Rabbi Eliezer give this answer? The name of Rabbi Eliezer, Nami Lishni, let him give this answer. Shekadim v'shachtu, where he went ahead, he advanced, got ahead of Beis Din, and he slaughtered it. Amar Lach, so he'll tell you, Hasam hudin iskavan laharagas abehem v'haragas adam. Remember, in that case, it's talking about he had intention, animal had intention to kill another animal and killed a person. So therefore, the whole thing wouldn't have started. The shar lav bar kateluhu. The shar is not even deserving of being put to death. It's lav bar kateluhu klal. So therefore, why should we be talking about a death? In other words, if it's an animal that deserves to be put to death, we could talk about shechting it beforehand or afterwards. In such a case, but in our case, says Rabbi Eliezer, where the animal didn't even have intention to kill a person, it doesn't deserve to be put to death. So therefore, I wouldn't even have to say the sakat chamin and the chayiv isr krolam ute. Aval hacha. In this case, the animal already deserves to be put to death. So lo tzarich kra, I don't need a pasuk. In other words, Eliezer wouldn't have even bothered with that because you don't need a pasuk where it's so obvious. Lo tzarich kra, because afagav the shachte, even though he shechted. Rabbi Akiva nami vadi hakihu. Gemara says, okay, so the truth is, this makes a lot of sense. In other words, if the animal is a bar ketela, so then why do you need to have a pasuk for it? In other words, the same answer Eliezer has is relevant to Rabbi Akiva. Ella Amar of Asi, Rasi explains, Hai milsa mipi gavri rabba shmi. I heard this from someone very big. Umanu, who is that? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. He explains, I would have thought, Hayavam Rabbi Akiva af tam shachav b'ad mashal b'moser nezek shalem. Even though, generally speaking, a tam only pays chati nezek, but a tam that harms a person, not kills a person, but harms a person, pays nezek shalem, pays for the full damages. So I would think mishtalim nami dmei eved me aliyah. I would think he also pays the value of the eved from the aliyah. In other words, I would say maybe all halachas of tam are suspended when it harms a person. I would think just like it pays the full damage, it also exceeds it pays the value that would exceed its own value. Pasuk to say that no, it won't pay from the aliyah. Rabbi Akiva broke his own shearing tool. In other words, it's another expression to mean that he himself caused his own problem. Why? The Tanya, if we learned in a brayso, Akiva says, Yachli Yishal min aliyah. I would think that the Shartan pays from the aliyah. Tam alomer k'mishpat hazeh yasalo. Just realized we only have 3 minutes left. The pasuk says, you're only going to pay Megufa from its value, but not going to pay from his pocket. So the Gemara says, so therefore Bekiva himself has a different drasha to tell you that he doesn't pay from the Aliyah. Therefore it can't possibly be that he's using Baal Sharnaki to tell you that you don't pay from the Aliyah. It's another pasuk. Rabba, it's just, Rabbi says, I'll tell you why we need Baal Sharnaki. I would have thought, since there's a chumrah when it comes to Eved more than killing a regular free person, why should Ben Chorin Yafa Sela no sin Sela? If Ben Chorin had a value of a Sela, again, the value is not really the person's value, but the market value. If it's only worth a Sela, you pay a Sela. Shloshim. If the person's worth 30, you pay 30. The Eved has a chumrah that it's always fixed, which is Eved Yafa Sela. If the Eved is worth only a Sela, no sin Shloshim, you still give 30. Therefore, I would say Mishtalam Nami. I would think that an Eved is different than a regular person, that you always pay from his own bank account. Because the pasuk tells us to tell you no, you only pay from its value, not from his bank account. Tanakh say the Rava, we have a price which actually backs up Rava, because what does it say? Baal Sharnaki, Mekiva Omer Kiva says, Naki me Eved. You don't have to pay the value of the Eved, the Shloshim Shekel. Gemara says, V'halodinu, should be a Kal Chomer. In other words, it makes sense. Hayol v'chayev Eved, v'chayev b'chorin, just like when a person, there's a chiyuv when it comes to killing anybody. An Eved, there's a financial payment for killing an Eved. There's also financial payment when it comes to a free person. Just like when a person when the animal kills a ben chorin, the short time kills a ben chorin. We differentiate between a short time and a short muad. I would say you should make a difference when it comes to killing an eved. There should be a difference between a tam and a muad. As a matter of fact, there should be a kal v'chomer. Logically, we should figure this out. Ma ben chorin shenosin kal shavyo chilak tebo b'tam and muad. Certainly, when it comes to a ben chorin, where you give the entire value, in other words, not only chatzi nezek, and still chilak tebo short time and muad. Eved enosin el shloshim. An eved, there's no kofar payment. The maximum it could be is 30 shekel. When it comes to a person, the kofar payment is the full value. But an eved is only shloshim. And wouldn't you say the same thing? You should be able to differentiate between tam and muad. The Gemara says no. It's not a good kal v'chomer. Why? Because machmereni be'eved yosem ben chorin. I would be more machmer when it comes to an eved more than a ben chorin. Why? Because ben chorin yafa sela no sin sela. A ben chorin has the leniency that if it's only worth a sela, you only pay a sela. Shloshim no sin shloshim. If the person's worth 30, then you pay 30. However, be'eved yafa sela no sin shloshim. An Eved, if the person's only worth a Sela, still there's a Chumrah, you have to pay the fixed amount of Shloshim. Yachli Yechayiv, I think that there's a financial payment that Yechayiv. Tamalomar, Baal Sharnaki, the Pasuk teaches us Baal Sharnaki, Naki means Eved, you don't pay anything, even though, in other words, even though there's a chumrah by Eved, that there's a fixed value of shloshim, nevertheless, you're never going to have to pay more than that. Now, the truth is, this chumrah also has a kula, because if the Eved is worth 100, still you only pay, Tosfos points this out, you only pay 30, but still having a fixed value is considered to be more of a chumrah. Sorry to get to the end of the Yamud. We'll have to stop here for today. We'll continue with Hashem tomorrow from the 2 dots. Have a great day.